This is CXO Secrets, the podcast that takes you inside the mind of business leaders and reveals the strategies behind their success. Coming up in today's show.
One of the things that's really enabled my own success, I think as a leader in the technology space, as well as just as a person, has been that I've had really good mentors. And I think that spending the time to seek them out and really make sure that I've found good ones and staying in contact with them for decades has been one of my secrets. And that's really enabled me, I think, to grow, to challenge myself, to look for opportunities on how I improve in name your area, right? Leadership, empathy, etc. I think the other one for me that is very helpful is I'm not rattled easily. And I don't know, some of that probably comes from, my mother and her, the way she raised me. Some of that probably comes from my time in the military, or it's working in a what can be a stressful security field, right? As cybersecurity leader, you are always under some level of attack. And so to keep a calm head and not be rattled easily, I think has been also a really key part of me feeling successful.
CXO Secrets is powered by EDS, going beyond connections. Find out about upcoming C-level events, experiences, and insights at edsxevents.com. John McClure, CISO and SVP for Enterprise Infrastructure and Cloud at Sinclair. Thank you for joining us on CXO Secrets.
Thank you, David. Good morning. I look forward to the conversation.
Good morning, good afternoon where I am. That tells me that you aren't here in the UK where I'm based, but where are you joining us from today?
Yeah, from the East Coast of the United States. So our headquarters is here in Hunt Valley, Maryland. So a little bit north of Washington, D.C.
All right. So we'll come to your role in a moment, I think. But first of all, tell us a bit about Sinclair. I know it's a media organization, but the US media landscape is entirely foreign to most of us who are based here in Europe. There's lots of W's and lots of K's and things that happen either side of Mississippi. Just tell us about how Sinclair fits into that.
Yeah, actually, I think a lot of people in the United States, it's a bit of a mystery as well. It's a really fascinating industry. My background hasn't always been media, but Sinclair owns or operates about 185 television stations in the United States, which represents us covering over 39% of the broadcast industry. But also, it's a very diversified company. Its roots were truly in local news and local sports and local delivery to our consumers, but they've really changed a lot in a number of years. So we also produce content. We also own some other media type companies like the Tennis Channel and the Pickleball Channel. So Sinclair is going through this real transformation right now, but it's an exciting industry, an exciting company.
Yeah, transformation. There are, of course, a lot of industries that are changing quite fundamentally, whether that's because of AI or because of changing consumer habits. And the media industry is certainly one of those that's affected by both of those. I was in a conversation only a couple of days ago with somebody who works with another media organization specifically about the role that generative AI is playing there. But as far as customer user behaviors are concerned, the fact that you and I are having this conversation on a piece of what might have been broadcast media 10, 20 or so years ago, but this is being done online. People are going to be consuming this on their smartphones, on their desktops as a podcast, and it's being broadcast on social media. That just illustrates the way in which people are changing how they consume their content. And, well, with the almost 200 TV stations and all the other properties you've got there, that means that there is a lot of disruption that must be taking place for you, John.
Yeah, it sure has. The whole industry has really been disrupted, obviously, in the last few years. And I think that's true for media, period, right? Whether it's print media or whether it's been traditional TV media. And again, I think it's a really transformative time for us. So we've really shifted, obviously, how we look as a company, how we deliver news. We've shifted technology. We've shifted business models. We've shifted kind of the types of employees and the types of skill sets that we employ here. So again, it's exciting. I think that if you talk to some people, I think they'll tell you, hey, over the air or OTA TV is dead. And we don't think that's true, first of all. But secondly, there's a lot that we have in terms of assets, whether it's content, whether it's thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of content that we've collected and distributed over the years, or whether it's infrastructure that can really play a key role in kind of what's next, or whether it's NextGen TV, whether it's some other future kind of technologies and industries that are being developed today.
Yeah, and I really want to come on to the future and how you leverage your existing assets into this vision of the future, and also what you do with the legacy later on. But I want to ask about your role in all of this, because you've got a couple of different hats there. What can you tell us about where you fit, I guess, from a kind of strategy point of view as to what comes next, but also in terms of protecting that very diverse estate that you've spoken about?
Yeah, so I joined Sinclair about 4 years ago, just shy of 4 years now, and I was hired as their first CISO, which was great. I think the company was really thoughtful in knowing that was a role that they needed to formalize and kind of make sure that we embraced cybersecurity as the company was going through this transformation. Shortly after that, I was also given additional responsibilities to support enterprise infrastructure in the cloud, which actually, I think, again, it was a really thoughtful decision in terms of combining those two roles. Historically, you see in a lot of companies, you'll have a leader of security and you'll have a leader of infrastructure, and those will be different roles. But we've talked for as long as we've talked about security needing to be integrated into IT and integrated into the business. But then we create two leaders and two roles and two organizations, and they don't obviously collaborate as well as perhaps they should. And so we've been able to collapse that responsibility into a single role that's really, I think, empowered us, made us more efficient, and definitely made things more integrated across the company. It's been a good journey, and I think some good decisions strategically.
So with that integrated role and the fact you mentioned that you are the first CISO there, what challenges did that present you with, kind of making a new seat for yourself at the table, having to establish some, obviously establishing relationships is one thing, but maybe there are some channels, some routes, some conversations that weren't happening before. You've got to find a way to make those happen and to build them into the business as usual. How challenging was that?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was challenging like any new role would be. I think, though, that the company, again, was insightful enough to realize the importance of it and kind of quickly gave me a seat at the table where I needed to talk to the right folks and give it the right focus. It's been well funded. The position and the function reports up through a committee and to the board. So I think they've placed it well organizationally. To your point, like anywhere, I think in success, it's relationships, right? Really building that trust early on, knowing that you're there to enable the business and accelerate the business, and you're not there as a hindrance, which sometimes people view security as, right? You're a bit of a speed bump. You're the office of no. You're all things that we've been perhaps saddled with reputationally in the past. And so I think it was coming in, making a quick impression that I'm our partner and that I'm in this to help make the company successful. And then really learning the organization quickly, I think, was really key to building those important relationships early on.
Yes, you mentioned being that office of no. It's about being an enabler of innovation while also, for example, wearing a CISO hat, safeguarding it as well. It is your responsibility to make sure that risk is mitigated. And that can be a fine balance sometimes. With your innovation hat on and with your leadership hat on, what kind of areas? We're talking transformation, necessary transformation here. What kind of areas is Sinclair looking to in order to stay competitive, also to stay relevant in a world that is vastly different now and will be even in 5 years' time to what it was 10, 20 years ago?
Yeah, a few areas, I think. I think one of the large areas that we really see just a ton of opportunity is an area called NextGen TV. Or you'll hear people call it ATSC 3.0, which just happens to be the protocol name, but you'll hear it referenced both ways. And NextGen TV is exciting. It allows for interactive TV kind of experiences with people in the audience, which really allows for obviously super targeted content that people would be most interested in. There's also, with ATSC 3, this ability for us to transmit data to people. So again, historically, we've delivered the news and we've delivered sports and we've delivered things that you would just watch and you'd consume that way. And that was a great kind of business to end consumer person who wants to watch the news. But what we can also do is we have this incredibly large infrastructure across the entire United States that can also deliver data. So if you think of, instead of news, just think of it as data. And so again, I think there's some really great use cases for how can we deliver data better, more efficiently, more resiliently. For example, in the case of storms, horrific storms, horrific natural disasters, things like 5G networks get very, very congested. You can't make calls. The towers aren't terribly large, 5G towers. So they'll typically get destroyed. And our infrastructure is built very differently, right? We've got 1,500-foot towers and things that are very resilient to storm and damage and things like that. So we can continue to get signal out. So whether that's emergency evacuation routes that are delivered to people, whether it's data to first responders, but also we can also help other businesses deliver data. So what I mean by that is if we think about today's cars, a lot of us get updates to our cars, right? I know every now and then I'll turn on my car in the morning and it'll say, download your new update and gosh knows what it's doing half the time, but it's giving me something that my car manufacturer wants me to have right now, or your cell phone, right? You get an iPhone update right on your phone. And right now, the way that those updates happen generally is we create one connection for each device. So each car, each iPhone connects back to the internet, back to Apple, back to whoever you have your car from, and it downloads the update. So again, very congested, very expensive to push over 5G networks. But imagine us pushing that signal one time to 1 million cars, right? From the infrastructure that Sinclair already owns. So
that's broadcast, isn't it? That is the definition of broadcast.
One to many, that's very efficient. It's very affordable. Yeah. And that just hasn't been something that's really been possible. Now we're already working with car manufacturers. We're already working with other people who want to deliver media in larger ways. We're working with outdoor signage. If you think of billboards, right? How do you update those billboards remotely? Campsites, how do you get data to campsites? So I think there's all kinds of these really neat methods and opportunity there with NextGen TV and ATSC 3 that we're exceptionally well positioned for.
That sounds absolutely fascinating, and to an extent, again, leaning into the innovation side of your role there, there's a degree of the art of the possible, of creativity. You've got this infrastructure that in some ways has kind of been taken for granted, and maybe all of the fun stuff's been talking about 4G and 5G and so on for the last 10, 15 or so years, but you've already got a rich infrastructure there, and it's a question of, okay, well, actually, there are lots of fascinating public benefit ways in which we could use this. So certainly here in the UK, we're seeing more and more digital infrastructure being classed as critical national infrastructure. Is that the case where you are in the US as well, with the kind of infrastructure that you're talking about, the masts and so on?
Yeah, we are. So there's 16 industries, categories that are categorized by Department of Homeland Security as critical infrastructure, and we are one of them. So one of the big roles that we have that's obviously critical to public safety is we carry the emergency broadcast signal on TV. You get alerts at the bottom of your screens or you name it. And so we are considered critical infrastructure, and we take that role very seriously. We think obviously not only are delivering frequently fun content, I think, and content people want, but we are delivering really critical services to the public. And we think that can even continue to grow, right? We talk about early warning systems to storms, interactive maps for evacuation, right? There are some other opportunities for us to support GPS in a different way in the United States. So whether that is increased accuracy of GPS for autonomous vehicles or drones. Right now within the US, it's approximately 1 meter of accuracy with GPS. So for a vehicle, well, that's almost 10 feet in the United States, right? So if something's 10 feet off and there's 2 of them, that's 20 feet of error that could occur between two vehicles or 2 drones or et cetera. And with us being able to support enhanced GPS, where we would also add in this ground signal, we get that to within a couple centimeters of accuracy. there's that, and also GPS delivers time, which is critical in every modern world, right? Whether it's banking, whether it's stock systems and stock brokerages, et cetera. And so we think there's also that ability to deliver even more critical services to the public that really continues to support our role as critical infrastructure.
So there's a lot of value, not only potential value, but already realized value in that infrastructure that you have. As exciting as all of that is, wearing your CISO hat. So take off your innovation hat, put on your CISO hat for a moment. That all sounds like a bit of a nightmare in terms of an attack surface. You've got a lot of different technologies there with an incredible reach into so many different industries, so many different types of devices. How on earth do you go about understanding that estate and then being able to quantify and mitigate the risk that it presents?
Methodically. How you go about it. You're right, though. We have an incredibly large and complex ecosystem. A lot of people we connect into and that connect into us. We do have a lot of OT, right? So when I think of, we have things that are microwaves. We operate with satellites. We have large dishes. We have vehicles. Then we have a lot of traditional IT, right? And we're embracing the cloud, that big push at us embracing the cloud. And so you're right. We have a very diverse attack surface, and one that we need to manage quite carefully. We got great teams, across the organization, whether it's the IT teams, the security teams, the broadcast teams, digital teams, you name it, that I think are well versed and take, our responsibilities very seriously on protecting Sinclair, its assets, and how important Sinclair is to the public. So it is a challenge. I surely don't want to minimize that. But I think a lot of big companies in today's world, especially in some of these more integrated large partner type companies that are like Sinclair, all are kind of juggling that same challenge, right? Of a very dynamic and diverse attack surface.
Knowing a bit about how the media operates here in the UK and indeed in Europe, and I'm sure it's the same in the US though, one of the major challenges is third-party risk management. And you've spoken about the number of different endpoints that your infrastructure could be delivering content to, whether that's individual people's homes or whether it's cars or whether it's smart infrastructure and billboards and so on. And just in normal broadcast workflows, you're working with independent production companies, you're working with freelancers, you're working with, in news, really, really sensitive individuals there as well. So how do you go about understanding and, again, really ensuring that the third-party risk management piece is as tight and as well understood and as well defined as possible?
Yeah, we have a dedicated function just focused on third-party risk management. And that function, some dedicated folks in there work very closely with our legal department on that as well, in terms of contractually and legally making sure those relationships are strengthened and that we have the correct liability kind of distribution or indemnification kind of clauses that are important to us as a business. In terms of security, I think in today's world, you have to put a lot of trust in your third parties. Obviously, we do our due diligence on who those are, what protections they have, how we're able to evaluate those. But I don't know anybody that doesn't have a huge reliance on third parties nowadays in today's super connected world. I think that there are many companies, we had the United Healthcare thing here in the United States that was big, right? That you didn't even realize in some cases, some of these third parties you were dependent on, and they might have been fourth or fifth parties. But that supply chain is complicated. And again, we really have a dedicated group that's focused on that. And we do hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of evaluations a year, in terms of third party, making sure we're managing that risk as well as we can.
And legacy. Let's talk about the stuff that you've had on the ground for a very long time. You mentioned microwaves there, for example. What kind of headache does the legacy infrastructure that you have give you? And are there any benefits? Are there any opportunities kind of in that legacy kit as well?
Yeah, I think some of the benefits and some of the opportunity is kind of what we talked about earlier, right? We got this massive, very resilient infrastructure of towers and, many, many ways for us to communicate. We we do use the internet. We do use microwave. So I think we got a really resilient infrastructure, which a lot of companies don't have. So we got a lot of ways to get signal out. But you're right. It can be a challenge. I think historically, the broadcast industry in particular, we built things that lasted a long time, right? You put a satellite up into space. That's not a 5-year investment. You build a tower that's, decades and decades and decades. And so over time, I think as industry and technology has changed, you've seen technology refresh cycles change, and at a more rapid pace. So there are ways that obviously we need to segment, think of that technology a bit different, protect it a bit different, because some of that technology doesn't go away or doesn't go away very quickly. But again, I think that every company out there struggles a bit with legacy tech, and kind of how to manage that. I don't think our approach is necessarily terribly unique. I think we follow a lot of best practices, again, on how we reduce that risk, manage that risk, observe that risk, report on that risk. But we're evolving away from some of that traditional stuff outside of some of that really key core infrastructure is talking about. We're really embracing a lot of modern tech now. And that, again, it's super exciting as a technology person to kind of see that and be part of that journey.
That point about refresh cycles, about technology cycles kind of shrinking and shrinking, in the telecom space, it's been about 10 years between every G, between 3G and 4G and 5G. We're midway through the 5G cycle, and already the conversations are pretty mature as to what 6G might be looking at. But in other areas, a decade is a very, very, very long time. So when you do have a lot of physical infrastructure and you see the cycles shrinking, how do you try to manage that? Is it possible to have a yearly plan or a kind of annual plan anymore? Or are you having to say, right, well, we're going to review every 3 months, every 6 months or so on, just to make sure that you are staying on that kind of edge of the innovation wave all the time?
Yeah, I think it's very dependent, to your point, a bit on the wave, right? I mean, we're in this AI wave, right? I think that's going to cause very, very rapid continued evaluation. And how are we either leveraging it from the business side? How are we protecting ourselves from it? I think there's a lot of angles on AI for sure. Yeah, I think the evaluation cycles have shortened. I think as attack methodologies also develop quickly, that causes, at least from the security lens, to us to continue, continual evaluation. That is never ending. We have to be as creative and as rapidly evolving as the bad actors out there. And then on the more traditional IT side, again, we are leaning really heavily into the cloud, which again really allows us to innovate much more quickly. Again, we will always carry some level in the foreseeable future, for sure, of this legacy infrastructure. And again, by legacy, I don't mean legacy as in it's timed out and it's time to replace it. Some of this stuff isn't time to replace. Again, satellites and large towers that we own and things like that. But we are finding different ways to protect them, different ways to enable them to grow our business and to deliver better products to our consumers, like we were talking about earlier, through a NextGen TV or some other opportunities there.
John, it's been fascinating to hear you talk about the value, this latent value in the infrastructure that you have, and particularly for those of us who don't not necessarily work within media, but within the kind of media technology space, to hear about the fascinating applications for over-the-air updates to vehicles and billboards and so on. Really, really enjoyed hearing about that. Thank you very much indeed for sharing. It's a fascinating role that you have. Before we let you go, though, there are some things that we ask all of our guests. Our show is called CXO Secrets. So, John, I have to ask you, what is your secret? If you put your modesty to one side, tell us what is the key attribute that you believe has enabled you to achieve what you have?
Yeah, I guess I'm going to cheat, David, and try to tell you two. We'll see if you keep
that's fine.
But I think one of the things that's really enabled my own success, I think as a leader in the technology space, as well as just as a person, has been that I've had really good mentors. And I think that spending the time to seek them out and really make sure that I've found good ones, and staying in contact with them for decades has been one of my secrets. And that's really enabled me, I think, to grow, to challenge myself, to look for opportunities on how I improve and name your area, right? Leadership, empathy, et cetera. I think the other one for me that is very helpful is I'm not rattled easily. And I don't know, some of that probably comes from, my mother and the way she raised me. Some of that probably comes from my time in the military, or it's working in what can be a stressful security field, right? As cybersecurity leader, I mean, you are always under some level of attack. And so to keep a calm head and not be rattled easily, I think has been also a really key part of me feeling successful.
We've spoken about that on the podcast before, about not being rattled, and certainly some leaders' approaches to that are always to be anticipating what the next ask is, always to be sort of planning what they could be asked. They may never be asked it. 19 times out of 20, the scenarios they're playing through will never happen. But on the occasion that it does, they've already thought it. It doesn't come as a surprise to them, and they already have a way out of it. Is that part of how maybe your military background has trained you, or is this just part of your constitution, John?
Yeah, I would guess it's a bit of both. I would guess that both play into that a bit. But I mean, when it comes to risk management, and you guys probably talk about it a lot on this podcast, I mean, you have to run just a billion scenarios by right all the time. I mean, it's constant. And again, when we were talking earlier about a little bit about attackers and how quickly they are evolving, you have to continue to run those scenarios by. And how are you going to get the business back online? How are you going to get the business back doing business? And so I think running those scenarios through and kind of, like you said, leaning forward a bit and knowing what might be coming has been really important.
We do a pass the question on the show where you get to put a question to a future guest, whoever they may be. We have a question from a previous guest, first of all, though, and this is the Chief Product Officer at Exabeam, Steve Wilson, and he asks this question.
So I think one of the fun things for anybody in a CXO role to think about is how do you think about when you're using your head, and how do you think about when you're using your heart? And what are the roles of hard skills versus people skills, and how do you think about that, and how has it helped you develop your career?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. It's a neat question. I think it's one that one way or another we think about daily. I think it depends on where it was in my career, to be honest. On which one perhaps I leaned into more. Again, you can't overlook either. I think they have they always have some value to balance your head with your heart. And I think early on, if we're talking about hard skills, as in hard technical skills, much earlier in my career, that was super, super important, right? I needed to be a really good network guy. I needed to be a really good cyber guy. I think as my career has changed over the years, the heart has become more important, to be honest. I mean, in terms of leading with empathy, in terms of connecting with people, in terms of building trust. Not that that wasn't important before, but my hard skill of setting up Cisco routers and switches is no longer as valuable as it was 30 years ago. But me being able to connect with people, connect with, again, instill trust, instill confidence, and really, again, lead with empathy. There's a lot of things around humble leadership, level 5 leadership, if you read some of Jim Collins' books. And I think that is just so critical in a leader. I don't think you're a good leader, to be honest, if you can't lead with some level of empathy.
You've just made me think on a reflection that I made 2 or 3 years ago, perhaps, and your point about how it changes during the course of your career, this balance of the skills that you need. And I expressed it in a slightly different way, not in terms of the hard skills and the soft skills or the people skills, but I think it's still very close to it. The way that I expressed it was earlier in my life, it was about answering questions. Knowing the answers to those questions was how I got the job, was how I was valued. But as I progressed in my career into leadership positions, it's actually more about asking the questions, knowing the questions to ask, knowing who to ask those questions to, and having that balance between the two and knowing where that turn is has certainly been useful for me.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And it's interesting, though, as a technology leader in particularly, there is a certain level of technical, acumen that people are expecting you to still retain. And so I don't think you can terribly, totally get away from it and just become this motivational speaker. There's some people who are probably really good at that. But there is this expectation of, as a technology leader, being in the room that you still know your stuff. And so, again, I think it's very dependent in some cases, perhaps on the role. But I don't disagree with you. I think that has changed over my career. You're right.
We spoke with Andres Andreu, CISO at Hearst, and he had exactly the same reflection of you there about still needing to keep those technical skills, keep your tools sharp, because that is a core part of your job as well. And you let those go, then you are gonna face problems. Interesting how another media guy here on the show is also kind of kicking the ball in the same ballpark.
Yeah.
Final question for you, John, and that is, what question would you like me to put to a guest on a future episode?
Yeah, no, thanks for the opportunity to ask. I think one that interests me for a variety of reasons is around veterans. So whether it's in the UK, whether it's in the United States, there's a lot of veterans out there who have come frequently up through a less traditional way into the workforce than a lot of other perhaps professionals that are later perhaps wearing a tie to work. And I think in many cases, it's a really untapped resource, to be honest. I mean, not that you don't see veterans entering the workforce, the civilian workforce, you obviously do. But I think there's a lot of untapped leaderships and skills and things that the military has embedded and imbued in people that can be really, really valuable to an organization and to a group. And so I'm curious how other organizations and other leaders, how they're leaning into their veterans and whether they see them as a different type of resource that can be valuable to the company, and how do they turn that from this potential value into real value, whether it's on the business side or on the leadership side. So I'm always curious how people will approach that.
I would like to do an entire podcast on that exact topic. We talk about, in Europe, certainly, I'm sure in the US too, about an aging workforce for all of the reasons. And we talk about skills gaps and so forth, and about a diverse workforce. Age is absolutely part of that mix, as is experience. There are some challenges with that as well, but I'd really like to pull at the threads of that one, maybe with a few people on the show. But thank you, John, so much for bringing that point up, and thank you for chatting with us today on CXO Secrets. It's been great to chat to you, and I hope we get a chance to do so again soon. John McClure, thank you for joining us on CXO Secrets.
Very good. Thank you very much.